Hello everybody, welcome into today's lesson video. I hope that you are well. I hope you are all taking good care of yourselves, balancing school, work, family, personal health, all that good stuff. Today we are going to introduce the final lesson, like learning concept, to help us build project number 1, problem solution impact research proposal. So this is where we're really going to dig into context lenses that we can use to help analyze our ideas and connect with how our topic, how our viewpoints and arguments make an impact on the real world around us. We are going to introduce about a dozen context lenses, but just like with the critical thinking toolbox in the past, everybody is not expected to master all 12 of these options. Instead, everybody should just choose 2 to 3 choices that really helps them dive deeper into their chosen research topic. So we're about to get started. Make sure that you are feeling focused and prepared. You have some device for taking notes, whether you're opening up a Google Doc, writing by hand, or typing along on your phone. Whatever works for you works for me. And when you're ready, let's jump in. So today's lesson is about exploring our viewpoints and using context lenses to help focus, frame, and filter the way we approach our chosen topics. During this lesson, we're going to dive into an overview of the viewpoint metaphor, look at techniques for helping to narrow down these sometimes like very large topics that we brainstorm and that we begin with. Helping to sort of give them a good focus and frame, just the area that we want to explore. Then we will look at selecting context lenses. We will be previewing 12 options today, and then applying a filter, so another kind of metaphor for how we use language choices within that rhetorical situation in order to give some style attitude to our voice. So let's get started. Remember to take notes, share questions, thoughts, or ideas in the Canvas replies below. And don't feel pressured to copy everything down. Instead, just grab onto the ideas that stand out to you, and also make room for adding your own thoughts, connections, questions, etc. all along the way. So let's dive in. So first of all, looking at the viewpoint metaphor. In learning, metaphors help us translate abstract concepts into an illustrated image that our mind can more easily retain and think about. Concepts of thinking, understanding, and knowing are frequently illustrated with images of sight or eyes, like viewpoint, perspective, point of view, stance, angle, frame of reference, etc. Do you see what I mean? And the term viewpoint is like, as when we say, like, introduce your own views, introduce your own viewpoint, unpack your perspective. It's much more than just a synonym for what your opinion is. So as we already learned why opinions are valuable in academic study, when we talk about our views, it's much more than that. The viewpoint that you bring into a topic really helps you shape your opinion. It accounts for some of your underlying values, beliefs, questions, bias, etc. Your viewpoint plays a major role in choosing what issues are important to you. So already your personal perspective has guided you into choosing which topic you want to research. Your viewpoint helps you construct a narrative and construct a rhetoric around those issues. So you see it from a different perspective as somebody else. So you're going to be telling a different story about that topic. Also, your viewpoint helps you characterize the ideologies, which is just kind of a big fancy word for talking about values, norms, ideals, goals, and concerns with it that are important within your topic. Since your viewpoint is so impactful in how you think about your topic, it's important to take time and energy to carefully develop your stance, your perspective, and your views so that you're really able to take responsibility for your own authentic and individualized thoughts, which is different from current trends or popular ways of thinking about a topic or historical norms. So carefully diving into your personal viewpoint really helps you elevate your own authenticity. It helps you also practice empathy, openness, and curiosity and flexibility toward others. So when we recognize how carefully constructed our viewpoint is, it helps us to have a little bit more respect for how other people's viewpoints are similarly important to them. It just lets us not disregard or easily discount someone else's viewpoint just because it doesn't align with ours. It also helps us, most importantly, understand how our ideas and opinions are situated within a larger context. So as critical thinkers, this mission to think deeply and compassionately about viewpoints, perspectives, and arguments, this mission to acknowledge and value divergent perspectives can really help us combat dangers of egocentrism, sociocentrism, anthropocentrism, ethnocentrism, any centralized thinking in general. So just valuing the variety and the diversity of viewpoints that are out there. So let's take just a moment to pause and look back at the notes that we have so far, thinking a little bit, how does this viewpoint concept begin to raise questions about your opinion for your chosen topic? How does considering different viewpoints help you really think about the problem and solution, or just the proposed impact, the proposed changes, and possible impacts of your own topic? Thinking about those things, keeping those in mind, let's begin to think about focusing and framing your topic. So again, the concept of framing is kind of like a metaphor. It's all about the choices that you make within that rhetorical situation. So what do you want to say? How do you want to say it in order to fulfill your purpose, in order to connect and influence your audience? Why are you talking about this in that way? Along the way, the frame that we choose for our topic will help guide which issues and concerns that we focus on. So each topic is pretty large, and we can list and list and list a lot of subtopics and a lot of details. But really framing and narrowing in helps us choose just a few issues to really focus on. It can help us categorize what is the big umbrella topic, and then what are the main topics that we want to dive into. And within each of those, what subtopics, what details are we interested in? Which is really how we define the scope of our discussion. So for me, when I choose this topic, here's what I want to include. And what that means is here are all of the things that I'm going to exclude. These are all of the other details and topics that are related, but we're going to set those aside for someone else to deal with so that I can really narrow in on my chosen details. The focus for your topic will help to guide and define what this topic means to you specifically. So different people will take the same topic, focus in on different areas depending on their own perspective. And when you focus in on a specific area, when you define what this topic means to you, it helps you to emphasize and amplify certain aspects that are important to you, while minimizing or downplaying certain aspects that are not as important to you. And there's no way for anybody to exhaustively cover every single angle of a topic. That's not your job here. That's why we want to really focus on like narrowing down how we approach the topic. Your job as a writer is to really be clear about how you are framing and focusing the topic of your project. You want to be able to really carve out that exact corner or that niche that you wish to explore. Sometimes it can be helpful to acknowledge the rest and say, within this topic, we might care about X, Y, Z, A, B, C, but for me, and for the sake of this course, this topic, this project, we are going to focus on just these main ideas, helping to really guide the reader toward your chosen interest areas without feeling that burden of having to exhaustively cover every possible option. So instead, choosing just a few and diving in deep. Pause again really quickly. Think about the opinions that you've brainstormed. Think about what you chose to brainstorm and how that, when we did our Viewpoint personal narrative paragraph drafting, we listed out a lot of things that we could talk about, and then we chose just a few that were important to us. Hopefully we practiced that again when we drafted our perspective or our argument. And we did that hopefully again when we brainstormed and drafted the paragraph about anticipating the conversation. So we possibly have brainstormed a lot of ways to approach the topic, and then along the way we narrow out and we just select a few that stand out to us. So thinking back on the work that you've been doing, or the work that you will be doing if you might be a little bit behind, how are you framing your topic? What details are you including, amplifying, and like energizing, versus what details are you setting aside, minimizing, or just holding off for another time? When you think about your topic, your own opinions, and the alternate opinions that you imagine out there, things that your classmates have shared through the discussion board, what seems to be the umbrella topic? And maybe is that broken down into subcategories with different details included? So think a little bit about how your own topic is coming along, making space in your notes to really be using this lesson as a back and forth kind of two-way street, to where I'm giving some general advice and guidance, and you're using that to apply to your own work. And then also think about these questions in more depth when we move on to our journal this week, which is the complete rough draft, where we are going to choose context lenses and use those to revise our analysis comments. So keep thinking about your own work as you continue working through the lesson. Now it's time to jump in. We're going to look at selecting critical lenses, context lenses. As we've seen before, it's another metaphor symbolizing, like, each context lens, each critical lens is a metaphor that symbolizes a set of questions and concerns that each of those lenses carries with it. A critical lens is a valuable tool because it helps you frame, focus, and analyze the significance and analyze the context and impact of your opinions and the other opinions that you include eventually during the research process. So jumping in general, there are some major context areas that we see throughout all of higher education across the curriculum: gender and sexuality, race and ethnicity, ability differences or disability studies, wealth and economics, environment and ecosystem, and then signs and symbolic codes. In English C1001, though, we are really concerned with diving deep into these 6 areas: psychology, society, culture, politics, history, and aesthetics. And right away, when you look at them side by side, you can see how they will overlap and blend and merge together. As we scratch the surface of each of these lenses, keep in mind a lens can help you frame and focus your topic. When you look through a lens, some details and concerns will be amplified while others will be minimized and set out of focus. Lenses are not mutually exclusive. We can overlap and combine several lenses at once for deep analysis. And lenses are not fixed. Why is it frozen? These thinking categories really are constantly evolving, changing, adding new questions and concerns, just like our real world context is continually shifting. I've done the best I can to include recent updated questions and concerns, but these things will change. And also, as we talked about in our opinions chapter, these are my opinions. These are my take on what each lens brings to the table. And with critical thinking as a whole, critical thinking education, widely speaking, is not just one agreed upon system. So each professor, each textbook, each thing that you learn is going to be coming at you from a different perspective. Lenses also are not arguments. Lenses in themselves are tools that can help us develop meaningful analysis. They provide questions and concerns to help us answer those so what and who cares questions, but it is up to us as critical thinkers and writers to apply those lenses effectively toward shaping our own individualized arguments. Each of these lenses is complex, robust, and nuanced enough to really deserve an entire course or an entire field of study all to itself. So in this class, we are just beginning to engage some of these large ideas. We're just throwing them out on the table, getting to see what's there, and dabbling with them a little bit. We are not reaching mastery. We are in the experimental phase of our undergraduate lower division learning. And as a note, as just a friendly reminder, since I know that students each have widely varying interests, widely different connections to each of these 12 lenses, we're going to introduce each of them, introduce an overall question or focus, and then if your job as a student is just to choose 2 or 3 that you want to explore in detail through deeper questioning and more focused analysis. So just like we're building a tailored, individualized critical thinking toolbox of different skills, different types of opinions, different habits and practices, different lenses as well. All right, getting into the fun stuff, gender and sexuality lens. The overall question is, how do we construct and express masculinity, femininity, androgyny within an ideological framework? And so that's just that sort of advanced, abstract way of saying codes, meanings, expectations, norms. So ideological framework for social relationships and cultural power structures. To dive deeper into this lens, we might ask how certain psychological, social, economic, or legal structures normalize the subordination of women and the empowerment of men. We might ask, how is gender identity constructed, maintained, or transformed by choices and habits for behavior and appearance. We might ask, what areas of society replicate heteronormative standards, and how might some members of our LGBTQIA+ population, how might some of their experiences be ignored, silenced, oversimplified and stereotyped, etc. Next, we'll glimpse the race and ethnicity lens. The overall question is, how does race and racism continue to shape and organize our daily lives, our beliefs, ethics, politics, surrounding identity, equality, justice, communication, aesthetics, etc. So the overall question, how are various aspects of life continually shaped by racism? Some deeper questions for a closer look at this lens. How do we culturally construct concepts of race? And how can this be used to express, exploit, and harm people, either explicitly or implicitly? How do formerly colonized or formerly enslaved people work toward decolonization or reclaiming authentic cultural codes, norms, and ideals? Or similarly, how do we fall victim to neo-colonialism? These are like new forms of colonization and perhaps slavery in the larger context of multinational or corporate culture. How do people living in diaspora confront unique struggles and unique strategies for identity, community formation, survival and cultural preservation, or like collective memories and ideologies? So if this is a lens that stands out to you, you can do a little research, digging into some of these concepts and ideas when it's time to dive into the research portion of your topic. Next, we will look at disability, the overall question being, how does society, culture, the environment, which includes like the built environment, like architecture, city design, things like that, disadvantage those with psychological, cognitive, or physical ability differences? Questions for a closer focus: how can we change norms and expectations to be inclusive for those who access the world differently, rather than continuing these norms and expectations that exclude, neglect, and disadvantage them? If we center the needs and experiences of disabled people, how might we transform our norms, expectations, aesthetics, etc., that have harmful impacts on those groups and other groups? When we centralize the centralized disability needs, what kinds of new social, cultural, political, and aesthetic norms and expectations can we really create? How might those new like ways of addressing the world, how might those new perspectives change the way that we think about ability and what ability means, especially in the context of, like, you know, our high demand, fast paced, corporate, hyper productive norms that we live within. Again, looking into those things through research, if anything here stands out to you. Next, wealth and economics. So how does capitalism structure our experiences of work and labor, industry and business, leisure and pastime? How do the values of capitalism, like profit maximization, transaction, etc., how do those things influence our social norms or other cultural values? How does capitalism organize power relations? So those who own and those who work, for example. What are some of the motivations and consequences for consumerism, marketing, things like that? What are some of the ethical implications of globalized consumerism and globalized capitalism? Looking at environment and ecology, How do we conceptualize, characterize, and interact with our environment? And that includes the natural world and the man-made world. It can also include virtual environments like through gaming or entertainment media. What values and ideals are encompassed by those choices of how we conceptualize the world around us, interact with the world around us. Namely, like just as a hint, extraction and possession are often the core values attached to these things. Within any environment or ecology that you choose to focus on, what are the roles of human and non-human entities? How do we apply concepts of responsibility and justice toward environmental conditions? How do we interact with these natural and man-made ecosystems? So within each topic that you choose, think about this, the setting, the environment that this topic connects with, and we can use these deeper thinking questions as a lens to help analyze, ask questions, etc. Next, we'll look at signs and symbolic codes. The overall question is, how do we use signs and symbols to construct layered codes of meaning, value, and ideology? Remembering that ideology is just this advanced way of talking about norms, expectations, and values. Looking closer, how can we shift or expand the existing codes that we see so that we can include alternate meanings or make space for ambiguous meanings? How does symbolic expression in art, fashion, style, and everyday culture reveal deeper layers of meaning? What are the impacts of dominant types of representation, so like mainstream, versus subversive types of representation, so alternative lifestyle type symbolism? And so the way you can connect with this is thinking about your topic that you've chosen and seeing if there's anything about signs or symbolism or like expression like this that makes an impact on your topic. And if there is, you can use this lens to dive deep into analysis and asking questions. So let's pause here for a minute. Notice how if we apply one of these critical lenses, we can push our analysis toward deeper meanings, larger implications, and consequences. Think about how these 6 basic lenses can overlap and blend together to help guide you toward more complex analysis. Keeping in mind that lenses aid our own independent thinking when we unpack the assumptions and unpack the consequences of an idea. They're not going to do this thinking for us, but they are a very helpful tool for us to ask those so what and who cares questions. And just as a friendly reminder, do not feel pressure to fully understand any of these lenses. We are just getting introduced today. Instead, just choose 1 or 2 off of this list that you think stands out toward your topic that you can use to think more deeply throughout the semester. When you're ready to move forward, let's move on to the 6 fundamental 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm so bad with numbers today. Those 6 fundamental lenses that English C1001 asks us to connect with. That is psychology, society, culture, politics, history, and aesthetics. And yes, right now, these terms are broad, abstract, and ambiguous. So if you say like the social impacts, that doesn't mean much. So we're gonna dive deeply to look at practical ways to think about those concepts with more clear and precise vocabulary. So when we look at a topic through the lens of psychology, the overall focus is the interaction between the conscious and the subconscious mind, the interaction between what is expressed and what is repressed, what is manifested and what is concealed, the layers of intention, impulse, desire, fear, hope, things like that. Some key concepts are repression. So there's always like a deeper meaning that's hidden beyond the surface, or there's always something that we're fighting against when we're making choices, expressing ourselves, things like that, like creating policies, norms, expectations. Internalization. So like deeply internalizing outside influences, outside ideologies. It deeply determines the way we see ourselves in relation to the world around us. And then also fragmentation. So these conflicting forces and expectations that are kind of like pulling us in various directions. Next, we can look at society, and the overall focus is how a person's behavior and interaction is shaped by habits, norms, and expectations. And this could be person to person interactions, or it could be like institutionalized interactions. So for example, if it's person to person, it would be me and you. If it's institutionalized, it would be teacher and student, doctor and patient, parent and child, things like that. Those roles that we're given, and how those roles shape our habits, norms, and expectations for interaction. I need a new computer. This is driving me crazy. Okay, some key concepts to dive deeper. Human interactions, so just picking apart what they are, what are the norms, what are the expectations. Community formation, so what do we do to constitute belonging, community, and connection, as opposed to otherness and alienation. And then safety and crime. So what kind of codes and norms do we have for safety and security, as opposed to what is criminalized, illegal, etc. And then policing. So how do we police the boundary between what's allowed and what's not? When we look at the concept of culture, we can understand that abstract term by narrowing in on how areas such as family, religion, education, morality, law, language construct these shared senses. So kind of a community holding the culture together by sharing a sense of symbolic meaning, value, and expectation. Some key concepts, ceremonies and rituals. So what role do festivals, pastimes, celebrations, memorials, what role do these play in commemorating milestones or shared memories? How does our culture come together in response by using ceremony and ritual? Taboo is something that is closely connected to a culture that creates strong norms, rules, and expectations for behaviors, relationships, worldviews. So what is taboo? What is disallowed? Counterculture. So how do lifestyles that actively destabilize, actively contradict prescribed norms and expectations? So how does counterculture shake up what might seem to be a natural or normalized set of morality, symbolism, value, expectation? So if that's something that connects with one of your topics, those are some different angles that you might explore through. Politics does not mean like Republicans and Democrats necessarily. Politics refers to power structures. So how is power structured and reinforced by those values, norms, expectations that maintain some kind of relationship between who has power and who does not have power, who leads and who follows, who rules and who serves. So that's what we mean when we talk about that. Some key concepts are biopolitics. So looking at things like healthcare, for example, how do ideas about identity, the body, that type of thing, how do those play into these structures of who has power and who doesn't? power organizing principles, doctrines basically associated with all the isms like capitalism, racism, sexism, colonialism, fascism, anthropocentrism, and all the antis of that. So sort of how power is organized by these principles that seem to reinforce relationships of who has power and who does not have power. And then history. So the overall focus with history is how does the context of past, present, and future influence the meaning and value that we give to ideas, behaviors, relationships, norms, expectations, things like that. So when we think about our topic and we think about what is problematic, how might we make changes, we can think about how this topic has a long history attached to it, how things change over time. And we can also think about history in terms of our views toward the future. Some key concepts are continuity and change, so calling attention to the way that systems change over time, so which kind of means that they're not natural and permanent. Instead, they're socially constructed and flexible. One way that we might do a historical lens for our topic is to excavate some repressed narratives or repressed viewpoints, so we can emphasize how the norms and expectations have kind of marginalized or silenced other values and other ideas. And we can use our research to bring those back up to the surface. Futurity. So one way that we can use the historical lens is by predicting how this meaning and value will continue into the future, change in the future, how future populations might look back and evaluate today's context. So remembering that analysis involves that imaginative and creative level of thinking. That's kind of how we use each of these lenses too. And then finally, when we look at aesthetics, the overall focus is how aesthetic experiences can impact mood or state of mind in a way that leaves a lasting impression on attitudes, opinions, values, and judgments towards something. So in other words, based on the way something looks, feels, appears, etc., how does that actually influence our opinions, values, and judgments? Some questions for digging deeper into this idea is the idea of encoded meanings. So how style or appearance is actually coded through expectations, norms, etc., habits over time. How are these things encoded to suggest deeper meanings? And then we can also look at the impacts of aesthetic movements and how these things make an implicit commentary about our values, beliefs, judgments. So what's right and wrong, what we should or shouldn't be into, what is valuable or worthless. Some examples of that is like idealizing nostalgia, utopic or dystopic futurism, minimalism, maximalism, various like something core themes like cottage core, for example. So if your topic engages with one of those, aesthetic areas, you might use some of these questions to ask, how does this appearance actually influence our judgments and critical thinking, evaluation, etc.? So that was a lot of lenses to look at. Notice how throughout, like looking through your notes and stuff, notice how some of those context lenses overlap with one another, and we can use multiple lenses to really build upon complex questions or analysis commentary. And really think about which ones will be most effective for you to use with your own topic. So as I mentioned before, we have a dozen lenses here, and for most of us, a lot of them are not going to apply at all to your chosen topic. So instead, just choose 2 or 3 that you think will really help you ask good, deep questions when it comes to your research and your analysis. Keeping in mind, too, that these lenses are a great tool to help aid our own independent, deep thinking. The lens itself, like just saying an analysis comment like this has cultural impacts, that is not analysis, that is not an argument. You have to use those questions to actually guide your own independent thinking. So don't feel pressured to understand them all, just choose a couple that you really want to dig in with. So with all of those lenses kind of floating around a little bit, let's look at some specific ways that we can use language and writing to help filter our viewpoints. Again, keeping up the idea of using metaphors, the concept of filtering is another metaphor that that connects to the stylistic choices that you make about how you express your opinions and how you express your viewpoints. Stylized tone, language, etc. are rhetorical devices that we can use to help influence how the audience responds, so that we are making sure that our purpose is being met, so that we make sure that we are having our intended impact upon the context that we're digging into. So when we think about the role of a filter, this filtering language, it can significantly influence how you express your voice, your attitude, your meaning and intention when you present your opinions in the form of these academic arguments. This is the flavor that you're adding. When you use specific language choices, you can express your attitude, whether you want to be progressive or conservative, optimistic or cynical, whether you're celebrating something or you're trying to be like antagonistic and critique something. The language choices that we make plays a huge role in filtering our attitude and our viewpoint. So for example, if we use a lot of abstract words, it can make our attitudes and intentions really ambiguous or vague. So we really want to use precise and clear language just so that we clarify what it is that we feel about the topic and what we want our audience to feel about the topic. Also, if we include a lot of technical jargon, to some extent, it can increase our ethos or add expertise and credibility to our argument. But on the other hand, it can tend to isolate some of your readers. So if you're using abstract words, make sure you clarify them. If you're using technical jargon, make sure you clarify it, just so that your readers are really following your attitude. Sometimes we might bring in some trendy like buzzwords, cliches, analogies, or metaphors that help to capture the reader's attention. But just like abstract words and technical jargon, it can make your viewpoint seem a little bit unclear, ambiguous, uncertain. So when you're bringing in these buzzwords, make sure that you're clarifying to the reader what you actually mean. Like, so for example, if I were to use some language to filter my viewpoint about today's lesson experience, I would literally say that this video is chopped. And by that, I would mean that since my computer kept crashing, you kept seeing these frozen images, big lags between things that I'm sure I can clean up in editing, but the finished product is still going to be a hot mess. So see, the way we're using cliches, buzzwords, and trendy language can pull your audience in and make them feel connected and interested with what you're saying, but it can also leave them behind. So always make sure that you're adding clarifying and precise language along with these stylistic choices. We have two more to look at. So euphemisms, this is a kind of language choice that can downplay uncomfortable topics or diminish the seriousness of your ideas. And if you are coming out and critiquing problems and advocating for solutions and changes, you might want to avoid euphemisms because you want the problem to come across as serious and harsh as it really is. And then metaphors and analogies. So like we've been using these a lot, like joining a conversation, taking a seat at the table, choosing lenses to frame and filter your viewpoint. It can be a really great shortcut to sort of avoid some of the difficulties of explicitly explaining and understanding ideas. But when you do use these metaphors and analogies, it is crucial to always follow them up with a clear and precise explanation as well. So overall, all of these choices that we make within the rhetorical situation, from how we frame and focus our topic, to the lenses we use for analysis, to the language that we use to filter our expression, all of these choices helps us explore, develop, and communicate the layers of our unique and individual viewpoints, which is the key outcome for writing in higher education, for entering your argument into the ongoing conversation, making sure that you are fulfilling your purpose when you engage with your audience, along with the context that you're discussing. So all of the things from today's lesson, we will continue to practice and build upon throughout the week and throughout the rest of the semester. Remember to use the discussion space below this video in Canvas to ask questions. If there's ideas that you want more discussion about, you want to learn more, or if you're not sure if you understood something correctly, just go ahead and ask, and I will come in and answer your questions. There are my normal response times, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays. And after this lesson, make sure that we do our follow-up assignments, reading notes for chapter 4, evaluating ideas and recognizing fallacies. Remember to make your replies into the context lens discussion, so you can help classmates think about context lenses for their own topics. And then also remember to complete Project 1 Rough Draft. Choose those 2 to 3 context lenses, define how they help you focus on the topic, draft some big thinking questions that they help you ask without those so what and who cares questions, and then practice those lenses as you revise the analysis commentary that you came up with in your previous drafts. As always, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas, please reach out to me, and I will see you in the next one.